Hey, everybody, welcome. My name is Matthew. Thank you so much for joining. Today, a little bit deeper on yesterday's video. How often was the Bitcoin price above its 95% R squared power trend line, and how often was it below? Okay, so as I was recording this yesterday, I thought I could go a little bit deeper on the levels here of the Bitcoin price versus the all-time trend line. Specifically, how often is the price above the trend line? How often is the price below the trend line? As I mentioned yesterday, it's not often. You can see that. I mean, where it actually crosses the trend line, it's not often. How often is going to be the subject of this video. So I don't want to go through every little point where the price pierces above the trend line or falls back below. But let's just generally look here. So again, my data starts Bitcoin Pizza Day, May 22nd, 2010. We broke above it here when this was the first time. 50-cent Bitcoin price, the trend line. I should be showing this with decimals, but it's rounding to zero. The trend line at this point, the price is 50 cents. So we pierced it. We broke above, then broke back below literally 4 or 5 days later in November 2010. Now let's move to 2011 here. Headed a couple times in this run up in the start of 2011, and this was the most famous Bitcoin price pump until then. At the time, $30 per Bitcoin, mid-June 2011. $35 for Bitcoin, actually, June 10th. And this was actually the exact point where the first MTGOX hacking occurred. And we see here that, so just before that, we broke above, then back below the trend line, and we broke above it here in April. We stayed above it for a few months, most of 2011, you could say, and by October fell back below. And then again, a little bit above, a little bit below at the start of 2012, January 2012. Now, what you're going to see here as, again, this is log scale. Bitcoin was very nascent at the time. Price, of course, is going to bounce around a lot between, say, $0 and $30 once you hit $30. So when this trend line is growing itself from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, $6 at the time, it can be expected that Bitcoin's going to bounce around that a little bit more. But as the dollar value of Bitcoin increases over time, you see that that is much less frequent. Still happens every few months or certainly every few years, but not as often as it happened in 2010 and 2011. Here's the plus $1,200 Bitcoin sell-off end of 2013 into the crypto winter. Crypto winter, based on the all-time trend as of today, started somewhere in a full year after. Okay, so January 2015 is when the price fell below that and stayed below that for, as we know, another 2 years or so, which I will show you here in just a second, when it crossed back. But let's move out to the end of the crypto winter here, where we moved into mid-2017, actually pierced above and then back below very quickly in the summer of 2017. But the first time was in May 2017. So let's zoom in. May 23rd, that pierced above at the all-time trend line. Now, at the time, this trend line didn't exist, okay, because it was only May 23rd, 2017. This all-time trend line that you're seeing on the screen, again, that goes from Bitcoin Pizza Day 2010 until yesterday. So we'd have to look at a different trend line if you want to see exactly what happened at this time. So let's put in the 2017 trend line, and let's do 2016 for good measure. We're in the middle of the year here. So 2016, let's start with that actually. Remember, this is, as of this day, still below our all-time trend line. It's going to be in red. There it is. Okay. So this was fixed. This would have been fixed in 2017. We can see the difference. It is 1 to 2 days. Okay. So the price on May 22nd, $2,078 per Bitcoin. On May 23rd, $2,257 per Bitcoin. You move above both the 2016 trend line, which would have been the trend line visible at this point in May 2017, And we move above this all-time trend line, which calculates not only the pricing data until then, but all the pricing data after. So keep in mind how powerful of a trend line that is. The 2016 trend line was 90% R squared, the all-time until today, 6 full years after this, by the way. May 2023, that all-time trend line, 95% R squared. Both of those R squares, they simply mean the data moves around the trend 90 and 95% better than it would move around the mean. So incredibly good fit. Now let's just show 2017's trend line. So a little bit more data that would come in this picture, but let's just show it a little bit above the all-time trend line. So we can see that, again, Bitcoin's price passed all of these. It didn't pass 2017's trend line. On May 23rd, you'd have to go to May 24th. UTC close, $2,415 to pass the 2017 trend line, $2,276 per Bitcoin. So there we go. That's the end of the crypto winter. Again, it can bounce right back below. It's not, it's not unheard of. It happened a lot here in 2011, 2010, 2012. But we went to the blow off top here of 20,000 at the end of 2017. Then another big one here. This is another interesting one. Let's look at November 2018. This was a pretty famous drop. Okay, Bitcoin had been consolidating for the entire year of 2018. People were getting nervous. $6,000 per Bitcoin, and then boom, basically overnight we fall to $3,000 per Bitcoin. From early mid-November to early December, we fall $3,000 per Bitcoin. Interestingly, the trends that existed then, which by the way is not the all-time, so it's the blue and the red, they did act as some sort of support that was broken. Let's even put the 2018's trend line in for good measure. There you go. Again, the 2018 wouldn't have fully existed yet. I'm only calculating these as a cumulative year end, but basically it's the exact same number. So you can see this, the 2018 is actually the best one to look at here. It's like up to 2017, 2016. There you go. So interestingly, once it goes below the all-time trend at the time, the power trend line, this is a 93% R squared at the time, the price fell. Price collapsed a lot here. Recovered, within a year, back above it. But this is how it goes. And again, we don't really need to review probably too much. Here's the 2018 trend line. Again, let's go ahead and put in 2020s. And let's put in the all-time trend. Let's take off 2018. We see that we pierced above at the end of 2020. And then when the COVID meme stock, all the trading started, people at home in 2021, we hit the double top of Bitcoin's price getting above $60,000 per Bitcoin twice. But again, the 2020 trend line, which I mentioned yesterday, let's zoom out. Let's catch 2021 and say back to, 2017. So the 2020 trend line, again, very close to the all-time trend. And this is not an all-time low. That's the 2016 trend line. So yesterday's video, $500 below at any given point in time. Now it's going to increase as time goes on. So you're getting close to $1,000 below here. 2022, the 2020 trend line was, again, an interesting act of, in this case, resistance, where this is the closest trend line at the time. Again, the all-time trend didn't exist, but again, look how close it gets as we cumulatively add more days of pricing data every day. It's pretty remarkable that it's so close. Nonetheless, at this time, the all-time trend didn't exist. This 2020 trend line was pretty much as close as we would have been for the pricing action at the time. Once you passed above it, what happened? We were off to the races. All right, once we passed above that trend line, the price took off. And then again, when you fell back below it, we fell again, as we did all of last year in 2022. Now let's look at the 2021 trend line, because that's going to catch all of the double tops. I'm still not zoomed into a best place here. Let's take it from, say, here. Okay, let's catch both these double tops here. in 2021. Let's put the 2021 trend line in and understand where this is. Again, remember, this is always cumulative. It's not just the year 2021. It's from Bitcoin Pizza Day till year end 2021. Let's see where that trend line is relative to 2020's, which is one of the lowest that Bitcoin's ever posted, post that second sort of long crypto winter. Ready? There it is. There's some space here, a little bit of a gap, interestingly. So why is the 2021 power trend line of a 95% R squared, same as the all-time, so much higher than 2020's? Because you're counting basically this full year of massive pricing action. So the gap is not just 500 or 1,000, depending on the time period. You're getting to a gap of $5,000 in the trend line, comparing these two trends. So that's pretty interesting. Again, all that happens here is when the price is above the trend line, it's going to pull it up. When the price is below, it pulls it down. We don't need any cheeky stock to flow. We don't need something that doesn't encapsulate demand. This is a very simple one variable, one independent variable, one dependent variable, which is price, data set, trendline regression analysis, and it's going to encompass both supply and demand because we're simply looking at price. So very interesting to see how much higher the 2021 trend line is versus 2020. And again, let's put 2022 back on to see. We're going to catch most of the data now that's below 2021. Where's 2022 fall? That's going to be the next line. In between 2020 and 2021. And then obviously we're into 2023 right now. Let's pull in the all-time trend line, which is going to take all of it, coming down still below 2021 and below 2022's trend line, not below 2020's cumulative trend line just yet. We have about $1,000 to spare as far as the trend line goes. So this just gives you a flavor of how much that trend line can be pulled up. So over our rough prior numbers, 2020, 2019, with a huge year like we had in 2021, that trend line was pulled up, $4,000 or $5,000 over prior cumulative trends. And then a bad year, that trend line was pulled down $2,000 or $3,000 compared to that prior year's trend. So that's how it works. Again, you extrapolate it out, $600,000, $700,000 per Bitcoin, depending on which year you go. But if we look at the all-time trend line, $640,000 per Bitcoin, December 31st, 2020. Couple questions to answer as I finish this. How many times did it break above or below the actual trend lines? The all-time, 18 times. Let's answer the next kind of question I wanted to talk about. How many days of pricing data do we have here? We have 5,000 plus days of pricing data. All right, so 18 days only of breaking above or below the trend. It only happens 0.3% of the time. 0.3% of the time has the Bitcoin price moved either above or below the all-time trend line. So that shows you that this is an extremely rare event when it does fall below or pierce above, and it's probably something to pay attention to. Finally, you might wonder how often cumulatively, now that we have all this data and we're sitting here in May 2023, how often has the Bitcoin price been above the all-time trend line, and how often has it been below? You might think that it's much more often below based on the crypto winter and just the longer bears that we kind of see in Bitcoin. You'd be right. It's about a 60-40 split, meaning 60% of the time the price is below the all-time power trend of 95% R squared, 40% of the time it's above. So the air does remain more rare up above. As typically goes with markets, people get excited. They get a little bit crazy. You get these bubbles, these blow-off tops, these booms, and then you have retracements, consolidations. In the market, that's where we are exactly right now. If you look at, let's say, 2020 again and 2016, both are red, both are below the current trend. We may fall below. A viewer just commented that we may fall below one or both of these trends this year for 2023. We might We might indeed, because every day that this price, the Bitcoin price, which is $27,000, $28,000 at the moment, is below the trend, which says we should be at $49,000, $50,000, $52,000 at the moment, it's going to pull that all-time trend down. So we'll see. As always, at the moment, it's quite interesting. 2016's Trendline, 2020's Trendline, they're the all-time lows. And even if we break a new low here, I suspect it will be the same. We'll break all-time highs again, and the all-time trend will fly up in the future. That's just the nature of how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin is base money, remember that? And this is how the all-time trend line looks. And remember, 40% of the time, you're going to be above this trend line. 60% of the time, you're going to be below. Also, keep in mind the trend line does change over time, but the interesting 95% R-squared nature of this shows it's a pretty good fit and probably something you should pay attention to. Thanks for watching. Take care.